There is really one big, huge, gigantic story at the moment, and that, of course, is the new government. How are we feeling now the dust has settled, panel? Is Keir Starmer filling you two with hope? Let's go to you first, Christo. Are you full of vibrant anticipation, even joy?
Do you really want to go to me first? Because I don't have much hope at all. Sorry, Gemma, I know that you're full of beans this morning. Look, I think that the Conservatives didn't deserve to win the last election, and I'm going to say that the election that's just gone, and I'm going to say that many, many times. But that doesn't mean to say that Labour particularly fill me with hope. One of the things that I think is a big concern is going to be the highest tax threshold since 1948. That's according to their own figures. I think that they were very sketchy during the campaign about whether we would see capital gains tax rises, inheritance tax rises. We even heard that it being mooted about capital gains on your main residence being sold, and that was sort of denied, and then it wasn't denied, and then it was again. So over the weekend, I thought the good stuff, housing, I think that is something that we are in desperate need of, and if they manage to get that together, great. But over the weekend, we heard about ID cards, Tony Blair, the sort of ghost of Labour past, hanging around in the background. I'm not sure we need any input from Tony Blair, and I think if we do, it certainly shouldn't be on ID cards. So digital ones.
Okay, before you rain all over Gemma's parade, and remember, this is the honeymoon period. Keir Starmer's been talking about the sunlight of transparency. Let's allow a little sun, a few rays to trickle through. He hasn't done anything wrong yet, has he, Gemma?
No, not yet. And, you know, I am not affiliated to Labour. I personally voted tactically, which ended up in a Lib Dem vote for me. But I am one of these people on the left who has been waiting to see what happens with Keir Starmer. Now he's placed the Ming vase, as they described it, on the floor, and he can finally get his teeth into the job and get on with it. And I have been filled with hope and excitement. And I am so relieved to be waking up in a country that is no longer under Tory rule. They are in the bin where they belong, finally, after, you know, especially for the last however many years, the last bit with Truss and Johnson and all the rest of it, corruption, scandal, blighted by, frankly, misery and ineptitude. And here we have Keir Starmer, and the one thing they kept saying was, he doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a plan. Turns out, he's got a plan.
I mean, let's not put too fine a point upon it. Rwanda solution already in the wheelie bin. Already. It's before he even sat in a chair or walked up the stairs. That had already happened. I mean, it is, on the other hand, you could say, easy and cheap to bin something very, very expensive and painstaking and just go, nope. Boom.
But it's not just that. He made that fantastic speech talking about we will serve you. And that is the right way round. We've had these entitled, arrogant people serving themselves for too long. The other thing is the preparedness that's gone into his appointments. I think we've all gone, wow, Timpson, very imaginative, very positive, very clever. We've got a new Attorney General. I'm not a lawyer, but lawyers and barristers and people who are top of their game are going, that is an amazing appointment. We have an education secretary who was on free school meals. These things are important. We have Angela Rayner in there who lived in social housing. We have a better representation of the British people now. People who have...
Did you notice that when you said lived in social housing, neither of us intervened to talk about how many different social houses she might have been
I was about to ask.
Potentially and possibly living in at the same time.
Do you know what? Also, the amount of snobbery towards that woman. There was that pathetic tweet from some GB news person talking about the suit that she was wearing. So it's like, yeah, that's called social mobility. This is what we should be aspiring to, that people who've had a tough upbringing can make it to be deputy leader of this country, and I don't care what she's wearing.
Before you get carried away in a romantic flurry, let's get down to brass tacks here. It is straight to work for the newly appointed cabinet. There's been a flurry of announcements already. I'll just take you through some of them. The Mirror front page, here it is. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will give her first major speech later. The Mirror's reporting on her promise to make every Brit better off. We've got the Times and the Daily Mail, both of them here, looking at the party's plans to focus on building new homes and building on the Green Belt, which Keir Starmer now calls the Grey Belt. He says it's the ugly bits of the Green Belt. Also bringing back house building targets. And elsewhere, the new Education Secretary, the one you've just talked about, is beginning work on one of the party's flagship policies of recruiting new teachers. Incredibly important. The thing is, how do you do it? And Wes Streeting is meeting junior doctors in a bid to try and stop the strikes. Yvette Cooper is beginning recruitment for her new border security command, which she believes will stop the small boats crossing the channel. And on that point, the Prime Minister has scrapped, as we've just been saying, the Conservatives' controversial Rwanda plan. He says it's dead and buried. So there's no question at all, Christo, whatever your doubts are about anything and how much you want to pour cold water on something that hasn't even started yet, that they have got to work. I mean, they've got noses to the grindstone. They're in full swing, and they've only been there a matter of hours.
They have hit the ground running, and I think credit to them for that, without a doubt. And I'll say it again. I'm going to say it till I'm blue in the face. The Conservatives did not deserve to win the election. They didn't. I won't say where I voted.
OK, let's not talk about the Conservatives. Let's talk about what Keir Starmer has not exactly done, but set in motion and says he's going to. It doesn't mean he's going to deliver, but he says he will. The focus housing, the focus prisons, the focus security, all the things he's focusing on, and as we know, he's already embarked on this tour of Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, which I think most people will think has to be a good thing for a new Prime Minister to do. I mean, he's said a lot already. Is it the right stuff?
Some of it's the right stuff. As I said, I think that the housing stuff, I worry that he's not going to be able to get past the NIMBYs on the housing. And also, when did Green Belt become this grey belt? Because a lot of people will say, well, actually, that grey belt is sort of my back garden, thanks very much, or very near to it.
There is space to build. It's just that, as you say, the planning has been a rigmarole for years and years and years. We have to build
I agree.
housing.
That I absolutely agree on. And if they can find the right place to get over the NIMBYs on that, absolutely.
Right, now we're going to take calls on this after the break. The thought of more houses being built, what does that make you feel? Do you think, yes, bring it on, come on? In his first speech at number 10, Keir promised to rebuild hope brick by brick. Have a listen.
For too long now, we've turned a blind eye as millions slid into greater insecurity. Nurses, builders, drivers, carers, people doing the right thing, working harder every day, recognised at moments like this before, yet as soon as the cameras stop rolling, their lives are ignored. I want to say very clearly to those people, not this time.
We just talked about his busy weekend with various cabinet and ministerial appointments. He's also headed off to visit the leaders of the home nations. The Labour Party also released a promotional video with the title, Let's Get Started. Have a look.
I invite you all to join this government of service in the mission of national renewal. Our work is urgent, and we begin it today.
And Michael's on the line in Dover. Hi, Michael. Good morning.
Good morning.
How much hope is in your heart? Are you overflowing with optimism today?
Most certainly not.
Oh.
It is the most vacuous of manifestos, and they're delivering absolute nonsense. The illegal migration issue is just mirroring the policy used by police forces around the world to tackle drug abuse, and all the banning of the Rwanda policy and introducing MI5 would duplicate what's happened with the drug trade. And it's going to go on and on and on. And the UK will end up being the EU's Rwanda. They'd be blessed. They'd just be sending migrants across to the UK. And where do we go then once we're flooded?
But, Michael, I mean, you're pouring cold water on something that hasn't actually happened yet. He's on the actual threshold of doing something, if indeed he does do anything at all, rather than just talk about it. But you're already decrying something that hasn't yet happened. And you can hardly say that the Rwanda solution solved anything so far. It's cost us an enormous amount of money. It's been an acute embarrassment to many. Lots of people have called it cruel. And certainly it's been hugely impractical. So you might say, stuffing it in the wheelie bin so fast at least gets us off the hook financially, and in terms of our appearance on the world stage, it wasn't really deterring anybody anyway.
You say that he hasn't done anything so far. They've cancelled the Rwanda policy, So they have done something. And you're saying that the Rwanda policy didn't work for the Conservatives, but you're telling me we ought to give Labour a chance to get it up and running, the alternative to Rwanda, yet we didn't have the Rwanda up and running. So you can't have it both ways.
I'm not trying to have it both ways. Jemma, do you want to intervene here?
Michael, the Rwanda policy was never going to work. It was unworkable on so many levels, and it hasn't worked as a deterrent anyway. We've got huge numbers coming across the channel, so there needs to be a different approach. One that isn't absolutely amoral, exorbitantly expensive and stupid. So we've got now Yvette Cooper, and she is going to be liaising with all the people that you need to liaise with, and Interpol and so on, and trying a better approach, in my opinion. And we'll see what happens.
Got to say, though, in fairness, when you say, liaising with all the people you have to liaise with and Interpol and whatever it is, it does sound a little bit like a scene from a James Bond movie, and absolutely, as Michael in Dover has just suggested, impractical, like a kind of fantasy vision, Christo, of what could be done.
I think, where I will agree is that we need to give another plan a chance. Rwanda was nonsense. I mean, it was absolutely nonsense. I mean, a plane didn't take off. I think that, Michael, you would have a much better point if a plane had taken off and actually then you could have seen the effects of the policy. But for me, I thought Rwanda was just always a gimmick, and that it would only have resulted in a couple of hundred people going there anyway. So from that respect, I am cynical, but that does not mean to say I think Labour have taken now a massive gamble, because if what they do doesn't work, then immediately people like Michael have got absolutely every right to say, well, hang on, you binned a plan before it had actually come to fruition, and so this is a very big gamble for them.
There also needs to be more intelligent conversation about why people are coming over. Until we stop selling weaponry to all sorts of countries where wars are created, until we start to address on a globally international scale the ravages of climate change, we are going to see more and more and more people fleeing their, inhabitable countries, or Bangladesh going underwater. This isn't an overnight solution.
I suppose it remains to be seen, and it really does remain to be seen. We can't yet pronounce upon it whether what Labour has in mind is kind of a fantasy culled from various detective stories, or whether it's got the potential to work. Michael, thank you. Let's go to Joe in Sheffield. Hello, Joe. Are you hopeful?
I am very much. I was just listening to the conversations about immigration just now. I think too many people focus on that or make a few unpleasant comments, shall we say. So I think what Jemma just said sums up what I think. I phoned actually on Friday, and I said, when Aisha was on, I said that I did vote Labour, but I was reluctant. And I said that I thought that maybe, I had my cynical suspicions. But now, I've changed my mind completely.
Really, you like the cut of his jib? You like what Keir's done so far? Are you worried it might be theatrics? Those flag wavers outside Number 10 welcoming him and Lady Vic back to Number 10. The meeting that was held, early breakfast time on Saturday. Was it to impress you, or is it really substantial?
I think that things like Waiting is meeting with the unions about the junior doctors, that they're going to change the contract with dentists for the NHS, because that contract is outrageous, that really needs changing. I think that the building new houses is really good, and I heard that Andy Burnham in Manchester was saying that a large percentage of those have got to be social housing, because I think that's very important. But I would like to see, I think Liz Kendall, that's now DWP, I would really like to hear what they're going to do about the horrendous treatment on people with disabilities. Thank you
so much for the call, and I'm glad you're more optimistic than you thought you'd be. That's a great emotion to hear flowing out of you this morning. Let's talk to Terry in Kent. Hello, Terry. Have you got hope at the moment?
No.
Oh, dear.
The bit I want to be up is like the houses, They're talking about building thousands upon thousands of houses everywhere. It's all right building the houses, but if you haven't got the sewage works there and you haven't got the water supply there, in Kent, in one area of Kent, on the border, they haven't got enough water going to the houses when it gets hot, because there's not enough reservoirs in the area. So if you're going to build more and more houses, you've got to make sure Yeah, so if you build a lot of houses, say, are you going to build another sewage works in that area?
Yeah.
Well, you might. Well,
Yeah.
you might, and you might call that growing the economy, mightn't you? You might call that jobs. You might call that expansion. You might call it all sorts of things. Obviously, you're absolutely right. Practically, you can't just bung up houses and expect them to survive on the existing utilities. But is it beyond the wit and wisdom of this party, this government, to build the concomitant, sewage and other facilities?
It's yet another thing they've inherited, which is on it, like the water situation. You're right, Terry. No reservoirs have been built in the last 14 years.
Will they? Can they?
But I think that you raise a really good point, in as much as it's very easy to say we'll build loads of houses, and I think most people would agree with that policy because we've so few houses at the moment, but very scant on detail about the infrastructure required to build all those houses and, of course, the money required to do that. And the IFS was very, very cynical, Institute for Fiscal Studies, about all of the parties when it comes to the commitments they were making versus the tax that they will raise.
Nothing scant at all about the fact that we need more housing. Nothing is in doubt about that. So we've had successive governments over decades failing to do anything about this. What remains to be seen is whether Keir Starmer's talking a good game or whether there are going to be actually any bricks that we see piling up. And if it's in your backyard, you may be thinking, oh my God, not here, not now, please not. Thanks so much to Terry for the call. After the break, hello again, welcome back. Jemma and Cristo with us this morning. Later we'll be asking if football is coming home after England's win at the Euros, which put them into the semi-finals. But now we'll return to the phones and ask if Keir Starmer and the new Labour government has filled you with hope. 0207 862 2222. That's the number you need, and we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Let's go to Amanda in Cheshire. Hi, Amanda. How are you feeling this morning?
I'm pretty good, thanks.
Good. And how are you feeling about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party?
I'm feeling pretty hopeful. I'm a town planning consultant, so it's probably the first time I would say in my whole career, I think, that I've got a little bit of a glimmer to be a little bit hopeful. The amount of times you hear planning reform, it gets used as political football all the time. It's kind of, you take it with a pinch of salt most of the time, but I've got to say the murmurs that were being made through the campaign that have built momentum and seem to be following through now into the new government. Yeah, I'm not going to get too excited, but certainly, there is hope there, definitely.
Guarded excitement is better than none. But tell me something, what are the sorts of reforms that you would like to see implemented and that you think would be practical and would help the housing shortage?
Well, the return to reviewing the housing figures will be a big one. Right. The Green Belt, any review of the Green Belt is going to be a good thing because that's just not been touched really since it was implemented.
And Amanda, people, when they think of the Green Belt, they imagine your beautiful meadows and rolling fields and valleys and corn blowing in the wind. What is some of the Green Belt like? The bit that Keir Starmer calls grey, the grey belt. What's that actually like?
So you're talking about those areas on the fringes of built-up areas anyway that probably should never have been included in a greenbelt boundary in the first place. There probably wasn't a huge amount of thought that went into where the boundary was drawn, is the reality of it.
So as a professional planning expert, you're not fearful that we will lose lovely, beautiful chunks of our green and pleasant land that we all need for our serenity and tranquility. You're not worried about that?
No, not at all. The worst thing that ever happened for the Greenbelt, the worst thing for the Greenbelt was that it was ever called the Greenbelt. It should never have been called the Greenbelt because it's never been about protecting the green. It's always been about protecting the brown, ironically, and protecting the spaces between the settlements. But it was the settlements that were to be protected, not the... Of course, it's lovely, it's green. Of course, it looks nice. But, we have national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty. There are, treasured, intrinsic, valued landscapes that need to be protected for the right reasons. The Greenbelt, yes, it looks nice, but that's not the fundamental purpose behind it.
What a fabulous caller. What a great caller. The right caller at the right moment on the right day. If Amanda's feeling guarded optimism, that's good. Let's go to Derek on the line in Northamptonshire. Hi, Derek. Morning.
Oh, good morning, everybody.
Morning. What do you think? How are you feeling?
Rather apprehensive, I would say.
What are you worried about, Derek? What?
Well, I'm really echoing the comments that the gentleman made earlier about new housing development. Now, whilst I appreciate that will drive the economy, I just also wonder whether that will have undesirable consequences for our environment and also detrimental effects upon our already failing infrastructure. It's all very well for councils to give the go-ahead in new housing development, but they know they will not be held responsible for the drainage of its district or sewage treatment. We'll all end up paying more for the provision of new infrastructure. That's
And
my
I
concern.
suppose, Derek, the question, though, your question is valid. Your concerns, of course, are pertinent and very worrying. But what alternative does a government have when there's a chronic and acute housing shortage? How can they not build? They've got to build somewhere, haven't they?
Well, maybe so, but the question is, our population is growing so rapidly. Is this why they do not want to control population? Because it will create a demand for more and more houses, which they also believe will drive the economy.
Of course, when you say population, you mean immigration, don't you?
Well, it is. It's grown dramatically.
But what's so interesting is our birth rate is falling as well, and that we're getting into a moment where we have a really ageing population, and that, you know, you actually do need to, you know, you need migration for the workers. But also, can I bring up one thing that Starmer's done as well since he hit the ground?
Yes.
He had a big meeting and he talked about standards in government.
The kind of behaviour he expects from his ministers.
And I would imagine that he's going to have a zero tolerance, no betting on you know, inside trading, no scandal. Can we please not have any sex scandals? Can we please not have terrible behaviour? And I think that's a really important thing
Christo,
to
you
talk
might
about
say
today as well.
good luck with that.
Yeah, they're all well behaved in the first few months, aren't they? But
Yeah, I'm sure
we'll see what happens. But again, I think that Derek makes a really good point about the housing. If we stopped immigration today and just built houses, we would still need 4.5 million. That's how many houses short we are. Labour are talking about 1.5 million over the term of the next 5 years. There is no point, and I don't say this in a xenophobic way, I don't say this in a way that is anything about colour or anything else like this, but infrastructure versus population is a massive issue that we have here in the UK at the moment. And if the plans for Labour, which are based on growth, are based on housing being built, how do we pay for the infrastructure that is going to support that housing? Because without it, we won't get the growth, which will mean that they will have to put up taxes.
John's on the line in Kent, also concerned about housing. So you can see Keir Starmer's on the right track with this. Whether he, delivers is another thing, but he's on the right track, isn't he, John, to be concerned about it, as indeed you are. Morning.
Oh, hello. Yes, I'm very concerned because I've remember we've been in this position before in the when the Labour government got in power in 1964, and they were really gung-ho then with building, and they put up all this brutalist architecture and what we now call the sink estates and the tower blocks, office blocks everywhere, and it didn't really improve the landscape at all. It's just all the buildings that people dislike now.
Don't you think? Well, first of all, some people actually treasure brutalist architecture. The Barbican in London is an example. Yeah. People vying with each other to spend millions of pounds living on the 32nd floor or whatever it is. So John doesn't like it. I'm not sure I'm much of a fan either, but some people adore it. But John, don't you think over the last, how many years, is it 60 or something, that lessons will have been learned?
Well, no, I don't think so, because I think really what we need is new towns. Instead of just building suburbs on top of suburbs, which puts a lot of pressure on the schools and hospitals and doctor surgery, which they haven't talked about. They haven't talked about building more infrastructure, just houses on the green belt, which they're now talking about turning into the grey belt.
As a child of the 70s, we were forever doing projects on new towns at school. Were you? It was always Milton Keynes. Yeah. Milton Keynes as a model of a new town. We were always doing that. John, were you doing the same thing? Is that why you're saying it?
Yes, well, I've got experience of it. I used to I live in a block of flats. It's not a very tall block of flats. I used to look out onto a nice little church hall, and they pulled that down, and they built this huge house, which obstructs my view. So I know I sound a bit like a NIMBY, but it just didn't improve where I lived at all. And
I live in sound a bit like a NIMBY. That is exactly the definition of a NIMBY. Not in my backyard. It's in your backyard, and you don't like it. You are a NIMBY, but that doesn't mean you're wrong, does it? Doesn't mean you're wrong at all.
I think but none of the buildings they built in the last 10 years have improved the look of the area.
But what would you have liked them to look like? The Brighton Pavilion? What should they have done architecturally?
Well, no, nice sort of little houses and the way they built in the 20s and 30s, people like that.
Well, that's
Even though-
everybody. Do you know that's the most popular architecture in this entire
Yes,
nation?
but
Is
I
the
don't-
pretty 1930s semi, probably a little bit mock Tudor, and with roses round the door. I love those. I
think what John and Derek and others are expressing is of course, absolutely, you need joined up thinking here. You can't just build houses and then not have, the utilities for them. But
quite
can
true.
we just give them a chance? Because I feel like this bunch of people are intelligent enough to hopefully realise that and realise it's all got to be addressed.
Well, hopefully. I think it's a good point with the brutalist architecture, though, because I think that there are some developments in cities that have the infrastructure already which are dilapidated, horrific, and real eyesores. And actually, perhaps getting rid of some of those, allowing the social tenants to move back in them, but actually using that space in a better way, in a more efficient way, I think is a really good way of them being able to build where the infrastructure is already. So if I was advising Keir Starmer, I'd start there as well.
All right, and new towns, I think not a bad
Yeah.
New towns, like a good one. We make a note and send it to Keir. Thanks so much to John, and thank you so much for all your calls on this.